Alright, that's enough of that. It truly is amazing, that moment, isn't it? I think we all remember that first time ever, regardless of which medium that you might have discovered it from. Just that first time that we have seen or read about Peter Pan and the Darling Children flying through the skies of London in order to go to the second star to the right and then straight on till morning. Now that is such an unforgettable time that for many kids, it has completely resonated with them, where not only that they believed in magic, but that they believe that magic can really be fun as well. And for some of those kids, it would go and carry that feeling throughout their life. Like, they would go and have that sense of wonder even as adults. So it truly is a moment that can really be impactful for generations on end. But I have been thinking a little bit about that feeling, and how I can go and spice things up for this review. And I think I got a solution. Now, this might sound crazy, but I think this review can truly be magical and even more unforgettable if we can all fly. Now, of course, we will need a few things, and we already have them on ourselves. We got some faith, trust, maybe a bit of pixie dust, and all we have to do is just think of some happy thoughts and just have a countdown so that we could finally go. Are you ready with me? Alright, great! Because we're about to fly in 3, 2, 1, go! Okay. Let's see. How do we, alright. There we go. Okay. Let's see here. This one. Okay. Yep, should be good. We're flying! Oh yeah, and we gotta talk about Peter Pan. As we all know, Peter Pan is one of those works that people love to adapt, expand, and create their own versions of the story for generations across numerous of mediums. However, with all the different interpretations and twists of J.M. Barrie's story, that also means that there have been a lot of them that have been considered some of the best and some of the worst. There are some whose versions strongly resonate with audiences to the point of having a legacy of their own as strong as the original story, like the 1954 Jerome Robbins musical, the 1991 Steven Spielberg film Hook that presents Peter Pan as a modern adult returning to Neverland, and of course, Disney's 1953 animated feature, to which Tinker Bell eventually became an icon for the company, almost as big as Mickey Mouse. But at the same time, there are others that are notoriously bad for messing up the original source material in such a spectacular way, including a 2014 live TV version of the 1954 play featuring Christopher Walken as Christopher Walken trying to be Captain Hook.
Peter Pan has found a mother. Oh, yeah.
And a big-budgeted 2015 prequel movie that I personally consider it to be one of my favorite bad movies. Seriously, there are no words that can describe the levels of how so bad it's good it is. Well, maybe except for this.
It is time for the pine.
Now, with so many to choose from, which one am I going to be looking at? As much as it would be fun to talk about the ones from the best or the worst, today's subject is actually about one of the lesser-known feature film adaptations, the 2003 movie by P.J. Hogan.
Forget them, Wendy. Forget them all. Come with me, we'll never
Unlike many of the others, this movie is a sad story, and I'm not talking about the one in the film itself. It was an ambitious feature with a lot of heart put into it, especially from its conception by one of the producers of Hook, Dadi Al-Fayed. You see, after Hook, he wanted to do a more traditional adaptation of Peter Pan, something that would be even more faithful than the popular versions out there. He was already a step ahead thanks to his dad Mohammed Al-Fayed helping out with having the rights during Hook, and he even got into a relationship with the president of the Great Ormond Saint Hospital, which has the rights to Peter Pan. And by the way, the president at the time was Princess Diana. Unfortunately, as their love started to fully bloom, they both died in a car crash on August 1997. Mohammed had to then carry his son's legacy in order to still keep the movie alive as an executive producer. A few years later, after a lot of hard work put into developing the feature, it finally got a release at the end of 2003, and while it received some decently positive reviews from critics, it was a massive box office bomb, and a big reason for that was because it got completely overshadowed by other movies that gathered more attention at the time, like Cheaper by the Dozen and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. Kind of an unfair matchup, honestly. I mean, the choice was either the grand finale of the epic 3-part saga of the cinematic version of Tolkien's acclaimed fantasy novel series, or another Peter Pan adaptation. That, or a goofy Steve Martin comedy where he has a lot of kids, and even that seemed like a more alluring option.
No more.
It really was unfortunate that its heart was in the right place since its conception, but then was quickly forgotten by the public that lost millions of dollars and is often regarded now as just another Peter Pan retelling that's not as well remembered as either the Robbins or Disney version. But just for this moment, why not give this movie a chance? Let's give it a time in the spotlight to see if maybe it deserves to have an audience like some of the more renowned versions. And let's just say that now I got a handy technique to help me fly. No, not like that! I mean using this movie as my happy thoughts. One of the most notable things that people mention regarding this feature is that this is one of the most faithful movie adaptations, and it really uses it to its advantage. Throughout the film, it stays true to the mood of childlike wonder that encompasses the whole story and Neverland itself, on top of keeping the heart of it all with its message about growing up, and why it's important that when we grow up, we have to find the right balance between becoming a responsible adult and holding on to that fun-loving childhood innocence. This is also prominent in the feature's tone, but that can be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it doesn't ever take itself seriously to emphasize that the storytelling is coming from the perspective of a child, which is a perfect fit for something like Peter Pan. But on the other hand, it can seem like it's trying to be the most cartoony adaptation without actually being a cartoon with its style of humor, often feeling a bit out of place for something that wants to be a blockbuster adaptation of Peter Pan.
It's all a bit tragic, really, isn't it?
In a way, one repetitive issue related to this is that it would mostly get things right, especially when sticking to the original play and novel, but then it would include one extra element that almost spoiled what it tried to build. This is especially the case with Tinker Bell. In the movie, she's really full of life with a bit of that devilish personality thanks to the great and expressive performance by Ludivine Sagnier. But did they really need to always make her talk in gibberish? I know it might not be fair to make this kind of comparison, but when you look at the Disney film, the animators knew that her movements were enough to express her personality, and if they have to give her some sound, then they stick to what the stage production did and just play little bells because they know all they need is Tinkerbell's animation to express how she feels. I'm not saying that I'm against having a talking Tinkerbell, since it did work well in Hook, but again, did they really need to make her constantly talk like a minion every time she's on camera? She had everything it would take to make her a memorable Tinkerbell in the style of the Disney version, but that unnecessary addition ends up making her more annoying than feeling magical. But speaking of the performances, that's actually one of the best things from this movie. Sure, the adults did a great job, like Jason Isaacs as both Captain Hook and George Darling, and Olivia Williams as Mary Darling, on top of getting real Native Americans to play the Native Americans for once. But it's actually more fascinating to see how the film has a wide display of really good child actors. While it is true that their jobs were to act like kids when they were already kids, they genuinely feel believable in their respective roles and help shape Neverland to be this magical land run by children. Rather it be with the Lost Boys as a rebellious bunch that's also Peter's backup crew, or the Darlings who escape their regular life in London and get a chance to live the stories that they tell each other. But the true highlights among the cast that also help give the movie its own identity as a Peter Pan adaptation are Jeremy Stumpter and Rachel Hurd Wood as Peter and Wendy respectively. The one significant difference this has over the original source material is the way the film approaches the relationship between the two leads, now going all in that there is a romantic connection. But they can't just make it a direct love story. Oh, no. The romance is mainly used as a major conflict for Pan, always trying to suppress his true emotions for Wendy in fear that falling in love will slip him into what he's scared of the most, growing up and no longer being a kid. As for Wendy, she's depicted as a more adventurous type of girl, emphasizing a lot more on her storytelling side and never afraid to stand up for herself.
Sir, you were both ungallant and deficient.
How am I deficient?
You're just a boy.
So, with these two strong personalities, there's no surprise that they would have episodes of butting heads. But that's also what makes the young romance more believable. As kids, this is their first true experience with love, and while hard to go through, they're actually learning how to show their affection for one another and how to handle these big emotions.
I will say that there actually was one thing from the movie that did surprise me. Something I didn't expect that this was the origin of it, or even that it was made for this movie. Let me ask you something. Does this music sound familiar?
Yep, chances are you probably have heard of this music piece before, like part of some uplifting music compilation, or used in videos that are meant to reflect an inspiring mood. In my case, I remember when Disney used it for their Year of a Million Dreams commercials to promote their theme parks.
Come live your dream. During the Year of a Million Dreams going on right now at the place where dreams come true.
In actuality, this music was actually a piece of the movie's score by James Newton Howard, and I think it's safe to say that you know when a score is amazing when even Disney uses it for their works. And when putting it in the context of the film, it plays a big role in transporting audiences to this beautifully enchanted land with the promise of magic and wonder at every corner. Admittedly, I'm not a major score guy when it comes to movies. Like, the music isn't a big deal when considering if a film is good or bad unless it pays full attention to it like a musical. But this is one of those rare cases that not only did the score grab my attention, it helped enhance the feature to make it more engaging than it already is, on top of feeling excited that there are even variants to that piece.
But then there was one element of the movie that was considered a highlight for the feature. Back when it came out at the end of 2003, it was the most praised element of the movie other than its faithfulness to Barry's original vision. And I'm talking about, in this case, the visuals. However, the key word of what I said throughout all that was.
I'm sure that this was quite a sight to behold back when this was freshly released in theaters, but by today's standards, they can be pretty bad, and at worst, they can even be laughably bad. Okay, I don't necessarily mean that this is visually garbage. I can see what they were trying to do conceptually, and it's actually quite beautiful. Based on the color palettes, the aesthetic of the backgrounds, and the cinematography, the movie created a style that featured some inspiration from the Disney film, but still managed to find a voice of its own. And while some of that still resonates in the final film to present Neverland as this magical island, the movie can often feel clueless when it comes to using computers. Some could make the argument that the technology was still new back in the early 2000s, but keep in mind that this was released in the same year as Finding Nemo, yet this has CGI that can look worse than the first Toy Story. It doesn't really use a lot throughout the film, but when it does, it's quite noticeable when the kids are next to something digitally crafted, and that can stick out like a sore thumb. Like, does Peter really need to get his shadow back? I'm sure he could probably get a new shadow because his old one seems a bit defective. Another example of when the digital effects can be embarrassing is when it's time for the characters to fly. I am aware that the flying scenes themselves were really hard to pull off during filming, but it's not the actors that were the problem. They did fine. It's just that it can be stupidly noticeable that it's all entirely green screen, and kind of laughable to think the movie wants us to believe that these kids are soaring through the air on their way to Neverland.
What? At least I'm not pretending that I'm not.
But like I said, as bad as the CGI can be, it's not featured everywhere. For the most part, a lot of what you see is practical, and when it's shot in front of the camera, they can look really good. The sets are really well built and make the movie immersive, the costumes look nice and often creative, and the sword fighting scenes against Hook are really fun and add the story's signature sense of swashbuckling adventure.
Not bad for an old man.
I know I slammed hard a bit on the visuals, but they can be pretty good when the work is practical and literally in front of the camera. Not to mention that it does have some great ideas conceptually, and most of them do show in the final cut. So I would say generally, it is a good looking picture. And not only that, but combine it with all the other elements I've previously talked about, and you get what is possibly the most underrated Peter Pan movie.
The 2003 J.P. Hogan movie is a hidden gem among all the projects based on J.M. Barrie's classic story of the boy who never grew up. Granted, it's far from being the greatest adaptation with its own set of prominent flaws, like a tone that can get a little too ridiculous, even by its own standards, and some CGI and digital effects that are as outdated as how the Native Americans are usually portrayed in the story. But when the movie gets something right, it nails it beautifully with all of its strengths, turning this into a magical adventure to Neverland thanks to some great writing that presents a story that stays true to its source material and charming characters, including an upgrade to the main ones, impressive acting, nice looking sets, costumes and colors, and an unforgettable score. For fans of the Peter Pan story or admirers of J.M. Barrie, I highly recommend checking this one out, especially if you're looking for an alternative from the more popular adaptations out there. Overall, if I gotta put a score to it, I'd give it a 7 out of 10. There are better ways to visit Neverland, but this one is still a nice trip.
And what's great with this one is that this can be used as a good way to get people to be familiar with Peter Pan. And I don't mean the simple basic stuff, I mean like the original story straight out of the mind of J.M. himself. If they don't have time to read or don't have access to see the original play, then give them this movie and they'll get a good idea of what it's truly all about. And then, and only then, they'll know about the true magic of Peter Pan. Because the magic of that story is certainly better than the magic you get here. See you later, dudes!
Need a Wendy. Very exciting. 2 dead already.